Anthony Weston sat at his mahogany desk, running a tired hand over his face. The Chicago skyline stretched behind him through the floor-to-ceiling windows, city lights flickering against the evening sky. His mind should have been on the blueprint in front of him, a museum project that was meant to define his legacy. Instead, his thoughts were stuck on the nagging feeling that had been gnawing at him for weeks. Then his laptop pinged. From Lillian Weston. Subject: Dad, check your laptop. Anthony frowned. His 15-year-old daughter wasn't the type to send cryptic messages. He clicked the email, and a folder appeared, important. His stomach tightened. He hesitated before opening it. Inside, dozens of screenshots. Bank statements. Message logs. His eyes moved over the text, each line hitting him like a gut punch. I love you, Derek. I can't wait to be with you. He's so oblivious, it's almost funny. Rachel, his wife of 15 years. The woman who had stood beside him through every struggle, every late night, every milestone of his career. The mother of his daughter. And she was throwing it all away for Derek Matthews. Anthony exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of his desk. Derek had been in their home. He had laughed at Anthony's jokes, shook his hand, toasted his successes. And all the while, he had been sleeping with Rachel. He forced himself to scroll further. Then his stomach twisted into something darker. Bank transfers. Money drained thousands at a time from the trust fund he had set up for Lillian's future. Rachel had been stealing from their own daughter. A knock on his office door snapped him back to reality. Dad? Lillian's voice. Soft. Steady. But he could hear the tension beneath it. Come in, he said, pushing the rage down. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Her dark hair was pulled back into a ponytail, her hazel eyes locked onto his. She looked so much like him, sharp features, quiet intensity. You saw it, she asked. Anthony nodded. How long have you known? 3 months. She moved to stand beside him, arms crossed. Mom started acting weird with her phone. Always hiding the screen. Always texting. So, I installed monitoring software on her devices. Anthony turned to her fully. You what? Lillian didn't flinch. You weren't going to check? Someone had to. His chest tightened. She was right. He should have noticed. He should have seen the signs. But between work, travel, and the naive assumption that his wife still loved him, he had let his guard down. There's more, Lillian said, pulling out her laptop. She's been siphoning money from my trust fund. Look. She typed quickly, pulling up another set of files. His jaw clenched as he scanned the transactions. Designer bags. Weekend getaways. Jewelry. Lavish dinners. All with his money. All with Derek Matthews. Anthony forced his breathing to stay even, but his knuckles were white against the desk. What are you going to do? Lillian asked quietly. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, finally, he placed a hand on her shoulder. Nothing, he said. Not yet. Her brow furrowed. But, trust me, sweetheart. His voice was calm, but his mind was already working. Already planning. Your mother thinks she's smart. Let's see just how smart she really is. That evening, Anthony moved through the motions as if nothing had changed. He cooked dinner, set the table for 3, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and waited. At exactly 7:15 p.m., Rachel breezed through the front door, shopping bags in hand. Her blonde hair was styled to perfection, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. Sorry I'm late, she said breezily, not sounding sorry at all. The interior design meeting for the Matthews project ran longer than expected. Anthony watched her carefully, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. How's Derek? Rachel froze. Just for a second. A flicker of hesitation, gone so quickly most people wouldn't have noticed. But Anthony did. Fine, she said a little too quickly. Then, realizing her mistake, she forced a smile. Why? He shrugged, taking a slow sip. Just curious. She watched him, searching his face for any sign of what he knew. He gave her nothing. Lillian, dinner's ready, he called out. A moment later, his daughter appeared, taking her usual seat. She didn't look at her mother. Rachel noticed. Her eyes flicked between them, a crease forming in her brow. Dinner was quiet. Anthony watched Rachel the way an architect examined a structure for flaws. The way she avoided looking at him for too long. The way she checked her phone under the table. The way she acted like nothing was wrong. She had no idea. After dinner, Rachel retreated to their bedroom, humming to herself as she unpacked her shopping bags. Anthony followed. She turned, smiling at him. What? Anthony leaned against the doorframe, watching her carefully. You ever think about the future, Rachel? She blinked. What kind of question is that? He took another sip of whiskey. Just wondering what your future looks like. She scoffed, shaking her head. You're being weird tonight. Anthony smirked. Maybe. Rachel turned back to her shopping, dismissing him entirely. That was fine. Let her think she was still in control. Let her believe she was untouchable. By the time he was done, she wouldn't have anything left. The next morning, Anthony moved through his routine like a man walking through a dream. Every step was measured, every action deliberate. Coffee, news, emails. Rachel sat across from him at the breakfast table, scrolling through her phone, completely at ease. She had no idea. He studied her. The way she hummed absently under her breath, the way she twirled a piece of her hair around her finger, the way she was completely comfortable in the life she had been actively destroying. Anthony took a slow sip of his coffee. Busy day? Rachel barely glanced up. Yeah. Derek and I have a meeting with the investors about the new project. Then I might stop by the loft for a facial. He nodded thoughtfully. Must be nice. Rachel finally looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. Are you okay? Anthony smiled. Of course. Why wouldn't I be? She hesitated for half a second. Then she went back to her phone. She was still underestimating him. Good. Anthony glanced at Lillian, who sat quietly at the other end of the table, eating her toast, watching. She caught his eye and gave the smallest nod. It was time. By mid-afternoon, the first move had been played. Lillian sent him a text. Mom just tried to transfer $10,000 to an offshore account. I stopped it. Anthony smirked. Rachel had gotten comfortable with her stealing. She had no idea the walls were already closing in. He called his lawyer. Michael, Anthony said, how quickly can we freeze all of Rachel's access to our accounts? Michael sighed. Anthony, are we going nuclear already? Anthony chuckled. Oh, we passed nuclear 3 months ago. Now I'm just making sure she has nowhere to land when she crashes. Michael let out a low whistle. Give me an hour. Anthony ended the call and leaned back in his chair. Step 1. Cut off her money. Step 2. Make sure everyone knew exactly who she was. Rachel was in Derek's office when she got the first call. Her bank. She frowned, stepping away from the meeting. I'm sorry, what do you mean my card was declined? The woman on the other end hesitated. Mrs. Weston, your accounts have been frozen due to unauthorized withdrawals. Rachel's stomach dropped. That's ridiculous. There must be a mistake. I'm afraid not, ma'am. Your name has been removed from all joint accounts, per Mr. Weston's request. Rachel could barely hear the rest of the conversation. Her hands were shaking. Anthony. He knew. She turned, storming back into Derek's office. We have a problem, she snapped. Derek sighed, rubbing his temples. What now? Rachel slammed her phone on his desk. Anthony froze my accounts. Derek sat up straighter, his expression darkening. Shit. Rachel paced, her breath coming quicker. I need access to money, Derek. I need options. Derek was quiet for a beat. Then he leaned back in his chair. You need to handle this, he said simply. Rachel stopped pacing. Excuse me. Derek gestured vaguely. Anthony's already going after me. I can't afford to take on your problems too. You need to fix this yourself. Rachel felt something cold settle in her chest. He wasn't going to help her. Derek had been so charming when things were easy, so promising when she still had Anthony's money behind her. But now? Now he was distancing himself. Rachel swallowed hard. I have one move left. Derek raised an eyebrow. And what's that? Rachel exhaled, gripping her phone. Leverage. Anthony was reviewing blueprints when Olivia, his assistant, buzzed him. Sir, your wife is here to see you. Anthony smirked. Send her in. Rachel stormed into the office, slamming the door behind her. You bastard, she hissed. Anthony calmly set his pen down. Good afternoon to you too, Rachel. Cut the bullshit. She marched up to his desk, eyes blazing. You think you can just shut me out? He tilted his head. That's exactly what I did. Rachel exhaled sharply, pressing her palms against the desk. You don't want this to get ugly. Anthony let out a low chuckle. Rachel, this has been ugly for months. You're just now realizing you're on the losing side. She clenched her jaw. You don't get to just erase me, Anthony. He leaned forward. No, but I do get to make sure you don't take another damn thing from me or our daughter. Rachel blinked. For the first time, real fear flickered across her face. Anthony stood, straightening his cuffs. Here's what's going to happen, Rachel. You're going to pack your things. You're going to leave. And you're going to do it quietly. She swallowed hard. And if I don't? Anthony smirked. Then you're going to find out exactly how much worse this can get. Rachel took a step back, her breathing uneven. She had lost. She knew it. But she wasn't going to leave without trying to burn something on her way out. Her lips curled into a smirk, but there was no humor in it. You always thought Lillian was your perfect little girl, didn't you? Anthony's eyes darkened. Careful, Rachel. Rachel leaned in. What if I told you she wasn't as innocent as you think? Anthony's jaw tightened. Whatever you think you're playing at. Rachel's smile widened. Ask her what else she's been up to. You might be surprised. With that, she turned and strode out of the office, leaving Anthony standing there, fist clenched. He took a deep breath. She was bluffing, right? Anthony stood in his office long after Rachel had left, staring at the empty space she had occupied just moments ago. Ask her what else she's been up to. Rachel was trying to plant doubt, to make him second-guess his own daughter. He wasn't falling for it. Still, the seed had been planted, and he hated that it had. Anthony exhaled, running a hand through his hair before pulling out his phone. Lillian, his daughter, his strongest ally. He dialed her number. She picked up after the first ring. Dad? Her voice was steady, but he could hear the slight tension beneath it. Where are you? At home. I'm on my way. She hesitated. Did something happen? Rachel tried to play mind games, he said, grabbing his coat. Let's talk. By the time Anthony pulled into the driveway, Lillian was already waiting in the kitchen, her laptop open in front of her. She had pulled her hair into a messy bun, and a half-empty cup of coffee sat beside her. She looked up as he walked in. What did she say? Anthony didn't answer immediately. He set his keys down, poured himself a drink, and leaned against the counter. She said I should ask you what else you've been up to. Lillian's face didn't change, but he noticed the way her fingers tightened slightly around her coffee mug. Anthony raised an eyebrow. Anything you wanted to tell me? A beat of silence. Then she sighed, closing her laptop. She's bluffing, Dad. He studied her. Are you sure about that? Lillian exhaled, rubbing her temples. Okay, fine. I may have done a few things without telling you. Anthony took a slow sip of his drink. Go on. Lillian leaned back in her chair. I knew Mom would try to pull something once she realized her money was gone. So I made sure she wouldn't have anywhere to turn. Anthony smirked. And how exactly did you do that? Lillian hesitated, then shrugged. I might have leaked some interesting details about her spending habits to a few of her so-called friends. You know, the ones who only cared about her when she had money. Anthony let out a short laugh. So that's why she's been getting desperate calls from her social circle. Lillian grinned. They dropped her faster than Derek's stock price. Anthony shook his head, a mix of amusement and admiration in his eyes. You've been busy. She shrugged. She deserved it. Anthony's smirk faded slightly. I agree. But, Lils, I need to know exactly how deep you went. Lillian hesitated again, and Anthony's stomach tightened slightly. He set his glass down. Lillian. She met his gaze, something guarded in her expression. I might have also hacked into Derek's personal emails. Anthony's eyebrows lifted. You what? Lillian cleared her throat. It wasn't hard. His security is trash. Anyway, I found some really shady business dealings. He's been bribing city officials for permits, cutting corners on safety regulations, pretty much every illegal thing you can imagine. Anthony exhaled, rubbing his jaw. Jesus. I sent the files anonymously to the SEC and a few journalists, she added. They should start digging into it any minute now. Anthony stared at her for a long moment. Then he let out a slow whistle. You really don't do things halfway, do you? Lillian smirked. I learned from the best. He shook his head, trying to decide whether to be impressed or concerned. Rachel's not going to take this lying down. I know. Lillian's expression darkened slightly. But neither are we. Anthony watched her carefully. She was strong, maybe even stronger than he had ever realized. But she was also young. And this wasn't just a game. You don't regret any of this? He asked, watching her closely. Lillian exhaled. She stole from me, Dad. From us. And she thought she'd get away with it. She met his eyes, steady and sure. She doesn't get to win. Anthony nodded slowly. No, she didn't. Rachel's world began unraveling faster than she could keep up. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Claire, Rachel, what the hell is this? Why is your name all over the news? Diana, I can't be associated with this. Don't call me. Her accountant. I'm terminating our contract immediately. Rachel gripped the phone so tightly her hands shook. Then, as if things couldn't get worse, the news alert popped up. Derek Matthews under investigation for financial crimes. Anonymous tip sparks inquiry. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. No. This wasn't happening. She shoved her phone into her purse and grabbed her coat. Derek needed to fix this. Derek wasn't answering his phone. Rachel stormed into his penthouse, heart pounding. She found him in his office, pacing, gripping his own phone so tightly his knuckles were white. He looked up when she walked in, his eyes wild. "You," he seated. Rachel froze. "What?" Derek slammed his phone onto the desk. "You idiot. You brought this to my doorstep." Rachel's stomach dropped. "I didn't." "Oh, spare me," Derek snapped. "You think I don't know this is because of you? You and your pathetic attempts to play both sides." Rachel clenched her jaw. "I didn't leak anything about your businesses, Derek." Derek let out a harsh laugh. "Then who the hell did?" Rachel swallowed. "Anthony. Or Lillian." Her blood ran cold. Derek grabbed her arm, yanking her closer. "Fix this." Rachel ripped her arm away. "I don't have any control over this, Derek." Derek exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair. "Then we go after Anthony." Rachel stiffened. "You're not thinking clearly." Derek's eyes darkened. "No, Rachel. I'm thinking perfectly clearly. Anthony took everything from you. He's coming for me next." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We hit back before he does." Rachel shook her head. "He's expecting that. You go after him, and he'll bury you even faster." Derek's jaw tightened. Then, slowly, his expression changed. Cold. Calculating. "Then we don't go after him." Rachel's heart pounded. Derek smirked. "We go after his daughter." Rachel inhaled sharply. "No." Derek tilted his head. "She's the one who's been pulling the strings, isn't she? You said it yourself. She's the one who's been blocking your accounts, leaking information. If we take her off the board." Rachel took a step back. "She's a kid, Derek." Derek's smirk didn't fade. "She's a problem." Rachel's breath was coming too fast now. She had known Derek was ruthless. She had admired it once. But now? Now she realized exactly how dangerous he really was. And if he was willing to go after Lillian, what would stop him from turning on her? Rachel clenched her fists. Derek wanted a war. Fine. But he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Lillian was in her room when the notification popped up on her screen. Unusual activity detected. Her stomach tightened. She clicked on the alert, her fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. A security breach attempt. Someone had tried to bypass the firewall she had set up to monitor Rachel and Derek. She narrowed her eyes. "Dad," she called, already knowing this wasn't good. Footsteps approached, and Anthony appeared in her doorway, his expression calm but sharp. "What is it?" Lillian turned her laptop toward him. "Someone's trying to dig into my system. Could be Derek. Could be Mom." Anthony's jaw tightened slightly. "They're getting desperate." Lillian exhaled, pushing her hair back. "Yeah. And that's when people get stupid." Anthony studied her for a moment. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the exhaustion creeping in. She was tough, he had always known that. But this wasn't just some school project or harmless hacking challenge. This was war. And she was in the middle of it. "You sure you're okay?" he asked. Lillian hesitated. Then, finally, she exhaled. "I hate that I have to be this okay." Anthony nodded slowly, understanding exactly what she meant. He walked over and squeezed her shoulder. "This ends soon, sweetheart. I promise." Lillian looked up at him. "I'm holding you to that." Rachel sat in the driver's seat of her car, gripping the wheel so tightly her fingers ached. Derek's words still rang in her ears. "We go after his daughter." She had known Derek was ruthless. She had liked that about him, once. But this was a different kind of cold. Lillian was a kid. A smart, calculating, dangerous kid, but a kid nonetheless. Rachel closed her eyes, inhaling shakily. She had made a mistake siding with Derek. She saw that now, and she was about to make it right. She picked up her phone and dialed. Anthony's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. "Rachel." He let it ring twice before answering. "Whatever you want, the answer is no." Rachel's voice was rushed, urgent. "Anthony, listen to me. Derek's going after Lillian." Silence. Then Anthony spoke, his voice dangerously calm. "What did you just say?" Rachel swallowed. "He thinks she's the one running the show. He thinks if he scares her, he can get leverage on you." Anthony's grip tightened on the phone. "And what did you say to that?" Rachel hesitated. "I told him no." Anthony exhaled through his nose, his pulse a steady, control drum. "Rachel, if anything happens to our daughter, you already know what I'll do to him." "I know," she snapped. "That's why I'm calling. You need to get ahead of this." Anthony's mind was already working, calculating. Where is he now? Rachel hesitated again. Rachel, Anthony warned. He's meeting with some people tonight, she admitted. I don't know the details, but he's looking for help. Anthony smirked. Help? From who? Everyone he's ever worked with is running for cover. Rachel exhaled sharply. I don't know, Anthony. Just be ready. Anthony was already reaching for his car keys. Oh, I'm ready. Derek was exactly where Anthony expected him to be. A private lounge in downtown Chicago, the kind of place where men like Derek made backdoor deals and whispered threats over expensive whiskey. Anthony walked in, calm and composed, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere in the room. A few men at the bar glanced over, recognizing him. No one said a word. Derek was sitting in a booth at the back, talking to two men in suits. He looked up as Anthony approached, his expression twisting into a smirk. Well, Derek drawled, leaning back. Didn't expect to see you here. Anthony slid into the booth across from him, meeting his gaze with a cold, steady stare. I hear you've been making some bad decisions, Derek. Derek chuckled. Depends on who you ask. Anthony tilted his head. I'm asking you. Derek studied him for a moment, then exhaled through his nose, feigning boredom. You think you can scare me, Weston? I've already lost everything. Anthony smirked. Not everything. But we can change that. Derek's eyes darkened slightly. Anthony leaned in. Here's what's going to happen, Derek. You're going to forget my daughter's name. You're going to pretend you never even knew she existed. And you're going to crawl into whatever hole you can find before I bury you myself. Derek's smirk twitched. You don't have the balls to it. Anthony slammed a folder onto the table. Derek frowned. Anthony gestured lazily. Go ahead. Open it. Derek hesitated, then flipped it open. His face changed instantly. Anthony watched, satisfied, as Derek's confidence crumbled. Inside the folder was every detail of Derek's real crimes. The ones even the SEC hadn't caught yet. The offshore accounts he thought were hidden. The blackmail payments. The evidence that would put him away for a very, very long time. Derek swallowed. Where the hell did you get this? Anthony smiled. Doesn't matter. He leaned in slightly. What matters is that I haven't sent it to the FBI yet. Derek's jaw tightened. You wouldn't. Anthony chuckled. Derek, you came after my kid. His smile disappeared, his voice dropping into something cold, lethal. You bet your ass I would. Silence. Derek glanced at the men sitting beside him. They weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking at Anthony. And that's when Derek realized he had lost. Anthony sat back, adjusting his cuffs. You have 24 hours to disappear, Derek. If I see your face again, if I even hear your name, I send that file straight to every federal agency that matters. Derek exhaled shakily. You're serious. Anthony smirked. Dead serious. Derek hesitated. Then he stood, shoving past Anthony as he hurried toward the exit. The two men he had been meeting with lingered. One of them looked at Anthony and nodded. Respect. Anthony didn't respond. He just stood, straightened his jacket, and walked out. Rachel was waiting outside when Anthony stepped into the cold night air. Is it done? She asked. Anthony didn't look at her. Derek won't be a problem anymore. Rachel exhaled, wrapping her arms around herself. And me. Anthony turned to her, his expression unreadable. You're out too, Rachel. She swallowed hard. Anthony. You don't get to come crawling back now. His voice was quiet but firm. You made your choices. Rachel's eyes shimmered for half a second before she looked away. She had nothing left to say. Anthony turned and walked away, leaving her standing there alone. For the first time in her life, Rachel Weston had lost everything. And Anthony, he had won. Anthony sat on the back patio of his home, the cool night air settling over the Chicago skyline in the distance. His whiskey glass rested in his hand, the ice clinking softly as he took a slow sip. It should have felt like victory. Derek was gone. Rachel was out of their lives. Lillian was safe. So why did it feel like there was still something unfinished? A soft creak of the door behind him. Footsteps. Dad. Lillian's voice was quiet, cautious. Anthony turned slightly, watching as she stepped outside and sat across from him. She had her laptop tucked under one arm, but for once, she didn't open it right away. You should be asleep, he murmured. Lillian gave a small smirk. That's funny, coming from you. Anthony exhaled a quiet chuckle, setting his drink down. Fair point. She hesitated, studying him for a long moment. Is it really over? Anthony leaned back, rolling the whiskey glass between his palms. Derek won't be a problem anymore. I made sure of that. Lillian nodded slowly, but her expression remained unreadable. And Mom? She asked. Anthony's jaw tightened slightly. She's on her own now. Lillian looked down at her hands, pressing her lips together. She hasn't tried to call me. She won't, Anthony said. Then, softer, she made her choices, sweetheart. Lillian inhaled sharply, as if trying to push something down. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe that she'd at least try. Anthony watched her carefully. She had been so strong through all of this. Calculating. Sharp. But she was still 15. Still a daughter who had just lost her mother, in a way. She loves you, Lils, he said finally. In her own way. Lillian scoffed. Yeah. The way she loves money and expensive handbags. Anthony didn't argue. He wouldn't lie to her. Lillian exhaled, rubbing her eyes. I should be relieved. I should feel. I don't know. Lighter. Anthony frowned slightly. But. She hesitated. Then she looked up at him, her voice quieter now. I just keep thinking. What if I hadn't checked her phone? What if I hadn't done anything? Would she still be here? Would she still love me if I had just looked the other way? Anthony's chest tightened. She was so much like him. Too much, maybe. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. Sweetheart, he said gently. Rachel's love was always conditional. On what you could give her. On how you fit into her life. That's not real love. Lillian swallowed. Then what is? Anthony reached over and squeezed her hand. This. Lillian blinked rapidly and looked away. Ugh, she muttered. You're getting soft on me. Anthony chuckled, releasing her hand. Don't tell anyone. It'll ruin my reputation. She smirked, but there was a small, tired weight behind it. For a long moment, they just sat there, listening to the night. Then Lillian finally opened her laptop. By the way, did I mention I've been tracking Mom's transactions? Anthony raised an eyebrow. Do I even want to know? She tried to buy a one-way ticket to Mexico. Lillian clicked a few keys, turning the screen toward him. It got declined. Anthony let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. Guess she's finally feeling what it's like to be cut off. Yeah, well, Lillian said, cracking her knuckles. I made sure she'll keep feeling it. Anthony gave her a look. Lillian. She grinned, completely unapologetic. What? She did steal from me first. Anthony sighed, rubbing his temples. Remind me to never get on your bad side. Lillian smirked. Too late. Anthony shook his head, taking another sip of whiskey. You're too much like me. Lillian pretended to look horrified. Oh no. The horror. Anthony chuckled. For the first time in a long time, things felt right. Rachel was gone. Derek was ruined. Their lives were theirs again. And whatever came next, they'd handle it. Together.